So we have 5 elements in an array, and these 5 elements are unsorted. So the way that selection sort works is it goes through several passes, iterating through the array, and it moves the smallest value to the front of the array. So if we look at this, the way this works is we start off with the very first element, and we assume that this is the smallest element in the array. So if we have a variable called smallest, then we're going to set the index of the very first element in this array equal to the smallest. So right now, smallest is equal to 0. So 0 index. So then what we do is we take that value of 34 at index 0 and we compare it to the next value in the array, which would be 22, right? So we ask ourselves, is 34 greater or less than 22? And it's greater than. So 22 is now the smallest value. So the index of smallest now becomes 1 because it now, between those two values, is the smallest value. So now we go to the next value and we compare 22. So now 22 is in red and it means that it's the smallest index. All right, so we now compare 22 to 10. And of the two numbers, 10 has the smallest value. So the index of smallest now changes to an index of 2. And now so that red is going to change to 10 now, because 10 now is the value with the smallest, or the index with the smallest value. So now we take 10 and we compare it to 19. And of the two numbers, 10 is smaller than 19, so the index remains the same. It's still 2, right? Because 10 is less than 19, and we're looking for the smallest number in these passes. So now we go to 17, and we ask ourselves, is 10 less than 17? Yes, it is. So again, the smallest value stays on 2, the index of that smallest value. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to swap. We started off with 34, and we have this value of 10 that we found while we were iterating through. And so now we're going to swap the smallest value that we found in our pass with the very first element in our array. So 34 and 10 are swapped. Their values are swapped, right? So now we can assume that that first position in our array has been sorted. So now we move on we start our iterations all over again, starting at the value of 22. So now we take our smallest variable and we set it equal to 22, as we're going to assume that 22 is the smallest value in the rest of the array. So between it, our subset now is 22. What we're looking at is 22, 34, 19, and 17. We've assumed that 10 has already been sorted. We've moved the smallest value to the front of the array. So we don't need to look at that value again. We just need to look at the remaining elements, right? So starting at 22, we're going to assume that that is the index where the smallest value resides. So then we're going to take that number and we're going to compare it to 34. So then we ask ourselves, is 22 less than 34? It is. So the smallest value remains at 22, like the index, right? So it remains at the index of 22. So then we go through and we compare 22 and 19. And between 22 and 19 is less than 22. So the smallest index now becomes the index of the value for 19. Right? So now the red is going to change to 19 because that's the smallest value that we've found so far. So now 19 is going to be compared to 17, right? And of the two, 17 is smaller, so that red is going to change to 17 because 17 is the smallest. So the index of the value of that smallest index changes to the index of 17. So now we look at where we started, 22, right? The value of 10 over here has already been sorted, so we don't need to look at that again. So at 22 and 17, we're going to swap. We're going to swap 17 to 22 and then 22 to 17. And so now we have two elements that are sorted. So now we start our pass all over again. Now, with the remaining elements, we're going to look at 34, and we're going to assume that 34 is the smallest value in the remaining numbers. And so our smallest value gets set to the index of 34. And then we're going to take 34 and we're going to compare it to 19 and ask ourselves which one is smaller. Well, 19 is smaller, so that smallest index becomes the value, it becomes the index of the value of 19. So that will change to red. And now we're going to compare 19 to 22. Well, 19 is still smaller than 22, so its value, the smallest index value is going to stay, it's going to remain at the index of 19. So then we go back to where we started. 34 is where we started, right? And we've found our smallest value in this past, which is 19. So we're going to swap the positions of those elements. So 19 now is going to be swapped with 34. And now we have 3 elements that have been sorted in our array. 10, 17, or 19 have been sorted. So now what we're going to do is we're going to, again, assume that the beginning of the first element and the remaining elements is the smallest value. Let me go back a little bit. So it is the smallest value. So what we're going to do then is we're going to compare it to 22 and ask ourselves, is 22 less than 34? Yes, it is. So the smallest index becomes the smallest index becomes the position of where 22 is. So now 22 and 34, we go back to the beginning because we're at the end of our list, our loop through here, right? So now we go back and we say, we're going to swap the positions of 34 and 22. So we swap those positions, and now we're at the end of our array, and so no other sorting needs to be done. And so now our array has been sorted.